What's up, Pod Pals? It's your buddy Adam. You're listening to Podcasting Business School. This is the show where I teach podcasters how to love their podcast like a hobby and build it like a business. This is a very special podcast audit episode. I've got my Pod Pal Simon here from the Paranormal Afterlife, and I'm very excited about this. I've got some ideas cooking already. And Simon, I just want to say welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to see what you can come up with.
All right. Well, I love interesting podcast niches. And that's one of my favorite things about doing these is I've talked to so many podcasters and there's so many podcast topics. I'm always fascinated because I'm like, I feel like there's just an endless amount of unique topics to touch on. So I think that, this has me fired up because it's definitely something, a niche that I haven't been able to dive into yet. So let's kick this off and set a bit of a goal. Let's say that we have a great session today and 6 months from today we're chatting again and you're telling me about all the amazing momentum that's been created. So what would that look like for you if you were to create a lot of momentum with your show for the next 6 months? Kind of paint that picture for me.
I suppose I'd like to see 40 or 50% more downloads in 6 months. Because I was getting about 140,000 a month. And I rebranded about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And now I'm seeing 160,000 a month. But in 6 months' time, I'd like to see 250,000. But the thing is that 140,000 has been that level for about a year. I was looking back across it. And so I'm thinking, I'm getting new listeners and I'm losing old listeners. It's a churn, isn't it? That's why I've plateaued.
Yeah. Okay. You first off, congrats. You've got a top 1% podcast with the numbers that you're doing. And I love the fact that you've got really realistic goals. Sometimes people are like, I'm doing 50 downloads per month and I would like to do 1 million downloads per month. And I'm like, that's a huge leap. But yeah, I think that the goal that you set there in 6 months is very achievable, very doable. What do you feel like, or do you feel like there's any roadblock or something that you need to learn about doing to be able to hit this goal? Do you feel like there's anything really that's getting you stuck with your growth right now?
I think it's marketing. I think it's I think I'm okay at putting the episodes together, the editing. I do an episode every Monday that is an hour-long interview with an author. And then I get permission from them to read an extract from the book. And I put a 10-minute episode out on Thursdays. That's me reading an extract. And those 10-minute episodes get just as many downloads as the 1-hour interview. And I feel like, it's being found, really. I think that's the thing. I have no talent for marketing. I think some people look at marketing stuff and it's just obvious. But for me, nothing's obvious. I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay. So I love this because this shows the power of one of my favorite podcasting terms, organic discoverability. So you are having huge organic discoverability. I think that the keyword paranormal in your title is huge for the type of audience that you want to bring in. I think it seems like a lot of the right people are finding your show, and you're admitting like marketing isn't your thing. That's not your unique ability or a skill set that you're like, I'm really killing it with the marketing. And so many podcasters stress out about the marketing. So I think you're a great example of like, if you nail the branding and the name and the keywords for your show, organic discoverability can be in the hundreds of thousands per month. So, we can definitely talk marketing. I think I've got a couple simple solutions actually for the first problem that you mentioned with like the churn of you're gaining new listeners, but you're also losing listeners. And so it's kind of slowing down your growth. And when I look at that, I use the word churn just like I would in a membership. So if somebody, like I've got a membership called the Download Growth Club, and I have a certain amount of people sign up every month. I have a certain amount of people stay every month. I have a certain amount of people that will leave every month. And obviously we want the people that stay and new members to be greater than the people that are leaving, like way outpace that. So if we view our podcast audience almost like a membership, we go, well, how do we get people to stay around? And I think, and we can tie the marketing into this too, but through this lens. So how do we get people to stick around? One way is to make your audience feel like a community, more like a community. They probably already feel like a community, but feel more like a community by getting them involved in the show somehow. And I do this in a variety of ways. You may be doing this already, but I think something like uh, I use a SpeakPipe audio recording link, just speakpipe.com. And I set up a link where I can send that out to my email or on social media, or, say, hey, check out the link in the show notes on an episode. And people can submit questions. So they can submit their podcasting questions. So maybe on that short 10-minute episode, you could also answer a listener question and you play their audio. They hear themselves on your show. And it's kind of like it's a neat little thing. And all of a sudden, your audience is hearing other people like them asking a question, or maybe they do a little bit of a feedback from a recent episode. One of my favorite shows called The Minimalists, they do this at the end of their episode. It's almost like, it sounds like an answering machine where it's just all these different messages of people's top takeaways from recent episodes or aha moments. I've had listeners that will do an episode recommendation where they're like, hey, this is Simon from the UK, and I love episode number 355 because blah, 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 blah. And those are great for the end of an episode because it encourages a new listener to go, ooh, that sounds good. And they'll go back and listen to the one that's recommended. And it's much different than me recommending an episode, because it's like one of their own is recommending the episode. It's not marketing. It's a true recommendation. So those work really well. So questions, top takeaways, anything they want to add to the conversation. So little 60-second clips work really, really well to have your audience be heard. And then it just pulling people onto your show. Like what we're doing right now, I'm pulling podcasters onto my show and creating content together. So things like this, panel style Q&A episodes, anything like that, where you let your community feel more like a community, I think it'll help with churn because they kind of take ownership over it. So I'll pause. Any questions or thoughts about that general idea there, Simon?
No, that sounds great. I hadn't thought of that. And I've tried community stuff. I've got a private Facebook group, and there's people in there, and we'll communicate. But that's 1,600 members. But so what's that? 1% of 160,000
Yeah.
downloads a month. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what if you were to have a call to action on a few episodes in a row to let people know and go, hey, if you haven't joined our Facebook group yet, make sure you get in, because my face group members are going to start being able to submit audio recordings with questions or episode recommendations or top takeaways and contribute to the show and contribute to the conversation. So now we're asking your listeners to join the Facebook group so that they can then every time you play one of those audio clips and be like, hey, this is another one of our Facebook group members. Here is blah, blah, blah from Indiana in the United States. And then they have their little audio clip. Don't forget, go sign up for our Facebook group so you can submit a question next week or whatever. So it kind of all ties together. And all of a sudden now the community members have a real call to action that's very specific, because audience engagement is something that we're all after, but too many podcasters are out there like, here's my email, send me some questions if you ever get them. And it's not specific enough because they're mowing their yard or they're out, working out at the gym or something like that. And they're not going to stop what they're doing. Like, I got questions for Simon. I need to go fire away here at this email. But if you're like, hey, you need to join our Facebook group so that you could submit audio for the show next week, or maybe you give them a topic inside the Facebook group and go, hey, we are talking about this thing. And it's kind of like a hot button topic that your audience really likes and really gets excited about. And you could have them submit questions for somebody you're getting ready to interview. And you could ask that question. You could play the question and then have that guest answer it. And all of a sudden, you're giving them direct access to some author that they're like, wow, this is my favorite author. And I've always wanted to ask them about this book or this character or this thing that they discussed in their book. So I think that could really turn your audience more into a community feel. I think they get very excited about that. So yeah, I think that's a winner idea.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions about implementing that? Or the link that I use, it's called SpeakPipe, and it's free and it's super easy. And they can record it. And if they don't like the recording, they can re-record it, and they can do it on their phone, computer. It's very simple. And it's our favorite price of free, which is always good.
So I could just put the link in the Facebook group and
Yeah. Yeah. Simple.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. With a call to action and like I'm getting ready to do a podcasting Q&A episode, and I'll go on social media and I'll go, hey, here's the link. Submit a podcasting question. I'll address it in an upcoming episode. I'll have 20 or 30 questions that go through there. I'll have to kind of spread them out. But it's great interaction. People think it's cool. And then imagine your favorite podcast, and all of a sudden you hear your audio on your favorite podcast. It's like, wow, like the whole new level of buy-in, and you've been made a part of the show.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an experiential component that we can add in there. Now let's tie it all back into marketing. When I have a new episode and I market that new episode with like social media assets and things like that, the way I view it is the reason I'm posting on social media about my most recent episode, it's not necessarily to attract new listeners. It is more to give my current listeners and followers a reason to listen, to keep listening. So if I create a 60-second clip from this video, the goal will be to post it on like Instagram. And the clip that I suggest, I want it to be interesting enough so that they're like, wow, I haven't listened in a couple of weeks. This sounds really interesting. I need to plug back into Adam's show. So it's to keep my current listeners listening. It's that retention factor. I'm posting a carousel image with my top 4 takeaways from this episode. I'm not a big fan of new episode, go get it. It's got, that's not enough. It's got to be, here are 4 takeaways. Here is the number one thing that blew my mind about this interview. Here's something that you probably didn't know about this guest, and like a little clip or anything like that. Give them a reason to be intrigued and to keep listening. And then, it seems like your organic growth is so good, your discoverability. If we can kind of plug the holes in the water that's leaking out of the boat with people, unsubscribing or whatever from the show, and keep those people there, and then the growth gets to be exponential. Yeah. So marketing wise, I'll pause. Any questions on that? So we can go a little bit deeper and get a little more strategic if you want to.
No, that all makes sense. And I'm definitely going to put those things in place. But I have a whole ton of questions.
Yeah. Fire away.
I worry that maybe I might be losing people because I have too many ads in my episodes. I've got programmatic ads coming in from the host, and I have an ad just before at the beginning. I have an ad after 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, it's 2 adverts, and then there's 2 posts, which I don't know if anybody ever listens to. But is it too much?
Ads, it's been shown that the more ads you have, the likelihood that you lose some subscribers. It does turn some people off, but we also have to, feed ourselves and our families, and I think the first idea that we discussed with making your listeners more a part of the show, I feel like that levels up the amount of buy-in, that like tribe factor. This is my tribe. This is my community. I feel like the more that you level that up, the more they will put up with things like ads, or if your audio isn't so great, or if you have a couple bad guests in a row or something like that, like the things that they will put up with, they'll stick around through that, to where if it feels more transactional and you're just putting episodes out and you know they're never a part of the show, like I think the more we level up that community factor, I really think that the ad thing, like I have people all the time that listen to me. I don't run ads on my show, but people tell me all the time, like, you know, you can run as many ads as you want because like I'm in this community for you. And like I've got so many people that are just like, I had somebody create a fake Instagram account that copied mine, and I had 100 messages within an hour. People were like, someone copied you, and I already reported them to Instagram. Like, my people have my back because I've talked to so many of them, like what we're doing here. Um, so I think, yeah. So I wouldn't be worried about having too many ads because, you know, we do need to monetize our brand and our shows and people will understand that. But I think, honestly, I think the elixir is the community factor. And the more you focus on that, the more you pull them in, make them a part of the show, make them heard, questions and comments and episode recommendations and all that stuff, or even just community member shout outs. Like you have, you know, some people that join the Facebook group and be like, hey, I'm going to randomly pick 5 people and shout you out on the show and mention your name or something like that and say, hey, or maybe somebody puts up the comment of the week or the community member of the week. They're really contributing a lot, you know, things like that. That's the way that I would focus. So long story short, I don't think you have too many ads. I just think that we ramp up other factors around that community building aspect. And I think that you'll be on the money, man.
Right. Okay. At the beginning of the episode, I've really cut down on what I was doing before, where I was saying, "Hey, come and join my Patreon and do this and do that." And I've got another podcast, go and listen, and I've really tried to cut that down a lot. But I kind of feel there's a thing in podcasting, you want to grab those people in the first 30 seconds or the first 60 seconds. So, how much is too much? If I've got 20 seconds of that, is that too much?
Okay. I don't necessarily think it's a time thing from my perspective. Like I wouldn't do 5 minutes long of the intro ramp up promo. To me, it's more about how many calls to action are you giving. So I'm a big fan of a singular call to action and multiple weeks of a singular call to action. So let's say you have to. Have you ever read the book called The One Thing by Jay Papasan and Gary Keller? Okay,
No,
highly
I
recommend it.
haven't.
It's excellent. It's excellent. So one of my most recommended books. So the principle behind the one thing is we're going to find the one thing that if that one thing is accomplished, it has the greatest overall impact of all the other things. So you look at a potential call to action and you go, what's the one call to action that if they do this one thing, it has the greatest overall impact for your brand? So is that join your Facebook group? Is that leave a rating review? Is it go to your website? Is it, you know, submit audio for the show? Um, so let's say you decide that it's join your Facebook group because then now you can, or join a lead magnet so they can be on your email list. Something like that is probably what I'd recommend. And just focus on that one thing. 'Cause if you give them one thing to do and they hear it for 4, 5, 8, 12 weeks in a row, then all of a sudden, it has to be weeks, it can be episodes. So if you do 2 episodes a week, it could be, you know, one call to action for 4 weeks worth of episodes. And all of a sudden, you're going to see people coming through and taking that action at a much higher rate than you would before, where you're like, come and see me on Instagram and then join my Facebook group and get my lead magnet and also hit that subscribe button. By the way, leave me a rating review and also write my mom a letter. Like it's not, we give too many things in that intro. So I think my rule for my own show is 60 seconds or less, one call to action. I'm happy with that. So if you wanted to have, you know, a simple call to action and then intro into the show and the topic of the show a little bit, I think that would be simple. And I think your audience would appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And then I suppose at the end, when you're doing the outro, you can be a bit more talky and extensive with that.
Yeah, you can, but I don't. I follow the same exact rule. I marry what I say in the outro to what I say in the intro. So if I'm like, sign up for my podcast growth scorecard, that's my one call to action. I'll mirror that in my outro. Hey, just a quick reminder, if you are struggling with your downloads, make sure you sign up for your podcast growth scorecard. This is the number one free way that I can help you out, blah, blah, blah. So I actually will do one single call to action and the same one in the intro and the outro. But we also have to keep in mind, like you said, the outro is the least listened to part of every podcast, where people just hit the, okay, this show's done. Let's move along to the next thing. Especially if it's after ads, like inserted ads, then it's even less likely to be listened to.
Okay, what about titles? Because that's a big thing, isn't it? People, they might like subscribe to a podcast and they get it all coming down, and they might scroll down the list and they'll be, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to listen to that. Oh,
Yeah.
that looks. So how do you put a good title together?
Okay. So I think I've got a little process for everything in my life, but when I'm naming an episode, I've got a multi-layer process where the first step is I just write down what it's about. And I kind of like, what did we talk about? Then I'll go, okay, what are there any searchable keywords that I need to put into this to make it to where if somebody searches this keyword on Google, this episode could potentially pop up. And then you go, okay, was this an interview? And if it was, is this person really famous? Like, do they have a huge following? So if my rule with a guest is if they have a giant following, huge, like big brand name that lots of your listeners will recognize, I'll do the episode number and then I'll put their name and then, you know, whatever famous person's name. And then I'll say what the episode's about with some keywords in there. If they're not a giant name, then I'll put the episode title with keywords in it, and then with whoever the interview was with, whatever author was with. You can even put the author's name in like brackets in the very beginning, and then list the title from there if that's a very recognizable author. And I just do that because sometimes, depending on what podcast player they're listening on, they won't see the entire title. It'll get clipped. So if it's a super famous person, that's why I put the name towards the front on the left side of the title. If they're not somebody that's like a huge following, then I'll put them more towards the end because I want them to see the keywords with what it's about. And they'll go, oh, that's a really interesting topic or book or whatever. So, but we do have a pretty good runway of what we see on that podcast player app. But sometimes my episode titles get a little bit lengthy. So got to kind of factor that in. So is that helpful?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, do you think there's a difference between trying to get more listeners and trying to make more money, and that you would have different approaches to bring those things in?
Well, if you're monetizing with ads and sponsors, then the name of the game is volume. Like you really do want it, like downloads directly convert over into dollars. The more listenership you have, the more you're going to be able to monetize that. Now, if you were down the road going to be like, I want to create a membership model, a paid community, things like that, then it'll be a little bit different. But yeah, with the model that you're doing currently with running ads, I think your focus is let's grow the heck out of this thing and make it as big as possible. And we're going to, I think that if I were you, the biggest focus point would be, how do I keep my current listeners listening? Because the organic discoverability is happening. You keep on keeping on more listeners onto the plate, and you keep the current ones on the plate, and then that plate gets stacked higher. That would be 100% my focus, because I think you'll create super fans, and super fans also go out and recommend the show. They'll be like, oh, you have to listen to Simon's podcast. It's so good. This last episode, start here. And they'll send it to their friends. Or if they hear their audio, I asked a question at the end, make sure you go listen. That's going to happen. So I feel like we've got a lot of action steps here, Simon. I'm excited to see what you do with it and see if the audience continues to grow and grow and grow. I want to make sure you get to shout out your show. So if people want to come and check out your show, Our Paranormal Afterlife, where should they go? Where do they come to connect with you?
Yeah. So in the show, I cover all sorts of things, like children with past life memories, near-death experiences, it's mediumship, deathbed visions, and it's all trying to find evidence of an afterlife. It's not from a religious woo kind of point of view. And there's over 300 episodes. My website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk because I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist and I sell that service. I got an ad for that on every episode.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Simon, I appreciate you being on here. I think there's a ton of potential. You're already doing amazing. You should really celebrate the fact that you are reaching so many people already. I always encourage podcasters to kind of celebrate those download benchmark victories as we achieve them. But I think there's great potential with your show, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. And for all my listeners out there, my pod pals, if you want to be just like Simon and come on the show and do a little bit of a podcast audit, head on over to the website, www.podcastingbusiness.school. Get signed up, get on my calendar, and we'll bring you on the show. All right, pod pals. Appreciate everybody listening in. And with that, I'm going to send you out into the world wishing you health, happiness, and many downloads. We'll see you next time.